Welcome to the After Work Hangout, the podcast where you'll hear why and how everyday people shifted their careers to meet their personal needs. I'm your host, Crystal Lee. In Season 1, we explored topics related to work and money. And now in Season 2, new guests join me to chat about work and health. From practical tips to heartfelt stories, we hope you'll get inspired and make the moves that are right for you. Welcome, Vea. It's so great to have you join the After Work Hangout. And we're already at Season 2, where we're chatting about work and health.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm so happy and grateful to have you here to join us. For the audience, I'll just really briefly provide an introduction to Vea Coronado. She is the principal and founder of Crowned and Calling, which provides decision-making strategies and relational care for value-driven groups and individuals. I know Vea from the community and specifically a app that we used to use to trade items called Buns. And I feel like you and I have always shared similar values and stayed in each other's orbits over the years. And so I'm so happy to have you join us, Vea.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to see how, meeting at an app, people meet in dating apps or, online or whatever. But I really appreciate seeing friendships and collaborations grow from, trading, bartering things.
For sure. And I do think we've interacted and engaged with each other in so many ways. And as we chat through our conversation today, I think we'll also talk a bit about how our careers and work has evolved. And I think some of the themes will, be present around how things come and go and change and shift and evolve. So let's get into it. Vea, I would love to just hear, can you describe in your own words what you do when you describe it to someone you don't know on the street? How do you explain what you do?
Yes, yeah. So a lot of the times, the people that I work with tend to be going through a big transition, either within their career, their business, or their organization, and they need to make a decision, and they need someone to bounce ideas off with that has that relational part of it, but also has the tools to be able to say, okay, if you have to co-create a decision with someone, what would that look like? And if they're an individual and they want to collaborate with someone, sometimes that person is me.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I can see it's when you describe it that way, I'm like, I don't even know what you would study to be that person, because it's quite a unique offering. So could you walk us through kind of how you got here, as far as you want to go?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, my background is in computer science and communications, but even a little bit farther from that, I was also a little bit in fine arts and literature. So in sort of my study years, I was definitely someone that just had a lot of side quests and would just take, different studies at a time. There was a season where I was in grad school and I was sort of in a program where I needed to specialize in something. I was in, kind of in the computer science tech area. And I realized a lot of the times in the tech sector, there is definitely collaboration, but sometimes you kind of lose the human aspect of it. It becomes transactional just because the sector is really fast paced. I felt like there's always that one aspect that's missing. But in the meantime, I would be exposed to different industries, different sorts of people, different frameworks of decision making, or even, in the corporate world, they'll call it change management when you need to hire and fire a bunch of people. And so all of those kind of culminated with me coming up with, I guess, the set of values that I believe in, and what I felt at that time was just a gap within the consulting and coaching area. And that's when, timed with sort of a little bit of a health scare on my end, where I came up with the concept of accompaniment and what becomes crown and calling. I would say, kind of in short form, I'm a little bit of a generalist. I've sort of been exposed to not just different sectors, but I think at the end of the day, it's really like working with different people that I realize, there's not really a prescriptive way of doing business or career or anything like that. And even just my own path of going through the corporate sector. I was an executive director in the nonprofit world. I do government relations, and all of this kind of span in, the last 12 to 15 years of my career.
Yeah, thank you so much for providing the story of how you landed where you are. And what I really hear is, at the end of the day, no matter where you work, there are people. I know we talk a lot about AI now, but there's still people behind every decision, how you implement the decisions. And so there is that layer of complexity that isn't just like a standard operating procedure, right? Like there's lots of nuance of how do you engage with different folks through change.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the times, actually, when working with individuals or with groups, what I find is that the articulation isn't because they don't know what they're doing or that they don't have an existing framework to make decisions. There just hasn't been time because, when you're in business or when you're having big career or life transitions, our tendency is to just act like we need to just move on something. And there's not a lot of time for us to really figure out, oh, why did I make that decision, or what in my values spoke to me where I did that. So a lot of the times when people enter into the space that I create, sometimes it's just feeding back, or almost, again, being a sounding board of what I hear has already been done, and having a little bit more of an awareness and acknowledgement of that makes decision making easier in the future.
Mm-hmm. And for full transparency, I am a coach that supports folks through life and career transitions. But I also know that I need that support sometimes. And so I've actually worked with you as well at certain points to clarify my next steps. And also, I love what you said about sometimes there's a tendency just to dive in, but we might need to slow down and find that grounding first of how things are aligned internally to be able to take the action that really feels right. And I've experienced your space for getting reconnected to that before taking the action. So definitely in the beginning, when I said our interactions have evolved over the years, that's one way we've also engaged with each other. Along with, more recently, we hosted community events together.
That's right.
And so, there's been so many things. And one thing that I also saw how you describe what you do is you accompany folks through milestones and transitions. And I just shared a little bit how doing the work I do, I also need support. So flipping it back to you, have there been milestones or transitions that you have gone through? And as someone who typically is a helper, a supporter, a cheerleader, like what has helped you through your own milestones and transitions?
Yes, I think a lot of the reasons why that concept of accompaniment is what I call sort of this space for decision making and almost like a coaching space that I create, especially for individuals, that really came about from my own transitions in life. I think when you are a helper, or when you're someone who goes through phases quite a bit. And for me, transitioning from the academic world to the tech world to the corporate world and all of that, and then my body kind of forced me to slow down, I realized that, it felt like I was stripped away. I was stripped away of certain identities that I had. And that's quite hard to wrestle with internally. And so I really relied on my community and even my own mentors, and working one-on-one with friends and intentional spaces like career coach and things like that. All of that really led up to the idea that sometimes you just need an external space to almost like untangle things that you're going through. But yeah, I would say one of those key transitions for me is having to need to slow down, not because I wanted to, but because, like my body was sort of going through a phase where it can't go as fast as I did. And what that meant to me and what I had to externalize with my peers, with my community, is not just what I was losing, but really what that entailed, not just with the actions that I have to take after, but really like, what did that really mean for me? And so this whole idea of, moving out of that traditional business consulting framework to moving into almost like a slower, a gentler pace of meeting people where they're at in their decision making is really a byproduct of how I was cared for at the time of my transition.
Yeah. When it comes to health in particular, so often it is outside our control. It's not something we necessarily predict. It's not a timeline that we choose or have any agency over. And in many ways, it can be quite disempowering or even scary, and many, many things. And it sounds like you likely had a really great community around you where you could be quite honest. Do you remember what it was like? Like, did you navigate certain feelings, fear, or like, was it just like, oh, I have this great community, I can just ask for help? Or what was it like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. It was very hard to ask for help. I would say it's still very hard to ask for help. What's quite funny with my own personal journey is that I am definitely an internal processor. A lot of the times I like keeping things in until at least I have a more tangible sense of direction. But I would say at the time when I was transitioning into Crown and Calling, I was having to navigate doctor's appointments and, having to be on disability potentially and looking for work, balancing finances and all that kind of stuff. And it was definitely at the threshold of what I could do by myself. And so it was definitely a test through fire sort of thing. I think I was definitely forced by the circumstance to use my community, not just for like networking or anything, but like really to process a lot of these very new things that I've never really encountered before. And I don't know how common it is with a lot of people, but I feel like there are specific health issues that tends to be, maybe it's not taboo, but it's not necessarily something that you bring up to when someone asks, how are you? And so one of the things that I discovered is that when I started opening up about, having to advocate for myself at the doctors, having to run multiple tests, like all those things, once I've brought them up, that's when people started to open up to me as well. And I realized that this is a really common issue when, doctors are not quite sure what's happening with you, and your health status is sort of fluctuating rapidly. And so I started even building new communities of people that have autoimmune disease, or people that also have sort of like mystery health things. And that made it a lot easier. But it was definitely a little bit of a trial and error, and a little bit of vulnerability, a lot of vulnerability, I would say. And so I think there's a lot of like character building that happened on my end to actually let myself be helped by others.
Yeah. It's so universal, these things you're describing. And I think you're right. So much related to health, it's stigmatized or kept under wraps, depending on culture, family history, whatever. It's so many different factors. But the truth is, we all go through that in some form or another. And when the first person is brave enough to be vulnerable, then it's like permission to also be vulnerable, and that forms such a strong bond and connection, and to feel less alone, right?
Absolutely. In some ways, I think I'm in a privileged position where when I had my health struggles and things like that, I got a chance to like readjust my work schedule and all that kind of stuff. But it's also really difficult to have to explain that, and you don't want to rehash that all the time, or make people feel like you need to be pitied, or whatever else. I think there's just a lot of like social stigma, exactly what you said, in terms of having to talk about what your body is going through, and what kind of accessibility needs you might need because of that. And it's definitely something that I'm still learning, and the more I expand my community with the different abilities that need those accessibility needs, the more I realize that, again, like, not one thing can be prescribed to an individual, because it's not just your accessibility, it's also your values, it's what you prioritize in your life. And I think that kind of work excites me as well, because that conversation again gets to the human core of things. It's not just about solving a solution, or solving a human being. It's just getting to know someone and seeing what they need.
Yeah. I love that you're touching on accessibility, because I do think the world we live in now, even compared to 10, 15 years ago, there's a lot more focus on inclusion. And it's not just about physical disabilities, right? Yes, absolutely physical accessibility, but also cognitive and emotional, and so many things. There's so many ways to look at how can we promote accessibility in the workplace. And in your case, you became your own boss. That means you can kind of call the shots, right? So what are the things that you have integrated to support your own well-being?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I started to talk about, and maybe one of the catalysts of this conversation, is cycle syncing, which I don't actually know if that's a real term or anything.
Tell me what you mean
But
when you say cycle syncing.
so, what I had found with my own health and mental rhythms is that it is a little bit of a cycle. So, every few weeks I would have really bad brain fog, and it's really hard to get out of bed, or I sometimes I suffer muscle inflammation and things like that. But the more I experience my health rhythms, the more I get to know my body, and it almost becomes intuitive when those seasons come. It's not always the case, but a lot of the times it's become a little bit more predictable. And so over the years, I've actually created a business model that is a little bit more forgiving to me if I am unable to deliver work in the same caliber as I would be on sort of my less inflamed days is what I would call it. And so, caring for my clients, or whenever I take on projects, whenever I do take work contracts from time to time, all of those things I take into consideration, and I negotiate that, and I communicate all of those things so that if I have really bad health days, I am able to give myself permission to just be in bed and not have to worry about a deadline and things like that. But obviously it took years and years to sort of build that, and it's definitely something that's still evolving as my body and my health and my mental well-being evolves as well. But yeah, in simplified form, I kind of call it cycle syncing, where, because I still need some relative structure in my month, I essentially have very high energy days where I can work, closer to the 8 hours, the traditional 8 hours. I churn out most of sort of the work that I need to do. I do all of my meetings. I'm out there. I'm running errands. Laundry is not backed up. And then, by the third week, sometimes it's still a high energy week, but most of the time it's a very low energy week. And so if I got up and brushed my hair, I would call that a win. and it's all good, because I've kind of allotted for that time to be a care week for me. And yeah, it's just kind of realizing that because I'm privileged to be self-employed, to run my own business, I don't necessarily have to keep the hours that I would if I was working in a big company, the traditional 9 to 5 or whatever. I can design whatever my body needs. Sometimes it needs the 9 to 5, but for the most part, it needs the 9 to 1, and that's okay.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I hear so many things. Like, the thing that really stuck out for me is you you are like a friend to your body. Like, you listen to it and you've been learning from it. And I think sometimes, especially when there's a health challenge on the other end of the spectrum, you could get kind of frustrated and kind of like not like your body so much, right? On the other end of the spectrum. But I feel for you, like, there's this compassion, and maybe it's taken a while to get there as well, like you described. But you have gotten to know and read the signs and get to know the rhythm. And so you have been able to be more intentional about all the other aspects of work.
Yes, I would say, even the rhythms of going to the doctors and having to figure out what your symptoms are, it's such a good practice of having to listen to your body, because I found that in my early 20s, when I would go to the doctor, they'll ask like, "Oh, where does it hurt?" And I would genuinely not know I'm like, I just know it hurts. And so I think even from those experiences, as frustrating as it is, and it's still frustrating, it's really given me a fuller context of how it would be like to advocate for my body, for myself. And that also means advocating for myself to myself. And yeah, so when I wake up in the morning and things are just achier, or the brain is just not functioning the way I want it to be, yeah, that compassion or that adaptability just kind of needs to kick in sometimes.
And you talk about being an advocate, and I would love to hear if you have any practical examples to share, or even ways you've communicated with the folks you work with. Like, how do you design it into your engagements and collaborations? Do you let them know in the beginning that, like, oh, just know that sometimes it can take me up to like X number of days to get back to you? Or I'm just curious if you have any concrete examples.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say one big thing that I try to be really intentional about is modeling my pace of communication. So I'm a night owl. So a lot of the times, my brain is the most awake at 11 at night when I'm reviewing podcast notes and things like that. But if it's a fairly new client, or it's someone that we're still trying to figure out what our rhythms are, I make it very clear whether an email needs to be responded to right away or within the week, or to only read it when necessary. So one example is that I tend to have an onboarding package to all of the folks that I work with. And there's a section of important things to know. And then midway through, there's no need to read unless you're keen. And it's extra notes about what they're expecting. I'm also starting to integrate voice notes as an option. So a lot of it is still written emails, but I always start off to say, if you would prefer audio notes to receive your information, just let me know.
Do you then record it, or do you get like AI to just read what you write?
Oh, I
Oh,
record I
okay.
record it. Yes, because a lot of the packages are also customized to the accompaniment space or the decision making space that I provide. But I find that sometimes, I work with folks who would like both, because sometimes they need to hear someone's intonation, to hear really not just the information, but the real context of what we're talking about. And some people just like having the paper trail. So little things like that, scheduling emails. So I know that creating a boundary, for example. So if I do say, or if I have an agreement with a project saying that my correspondence time is 48 hours, if I see their email right away and I have the capacity to reply to that email, I will write that email right away, but I won't necessarily hit send
That's
right
so
away.
smart.
Yeah, just to model that, we don't need to be on our phones 24/7. And, again, it's one of the privilege of being self-employed, but I would actually even say for the professionals that I work with, I talk them through, like, does that email need to go out at night, or are you in a position where you could recreate a work culture where you're not checking your email at night?
Yeah. I almost think your work is in culture change. Like, you're trying to shift work culture by each of those interactions you have with the folks you work with. That's really, really cool to see. And what's the response been like? I can imagine if I work in a more corporate setting and I try to do that, there might be like a fear of, oh, what would other people think? That like I'm just judgment and whatnot. But in your experience, when you engage with others in that way, what has the response been?
Yeah, I would say, and this is the thing too that I want to emphasize is that I have a very specific way that I work with people, and one of the things that I recognize is that that's not always the best way of doing things, but I like to show the radical side of advocating for yourself, of reimagining what productivity looks like, of creating a culture where it's human centric. And I try to go on the radical side of things and show even my process, because you never know what someone might resonate with and carry over to their own work, their own business. In terms of reaction, I would say it's pretty all over the place. I have a very unique privilege of having primarily referral only projects and clients. And so a lot of the times people work with me because they know that I have quite a radical way of creating organizational and career changes. So I would say it's very rare that there's resistance in terms of it, but it's always a pleasure to me to see that light bulb moment when I say that, like, oh, you're an entrepreneur now. You don't have to work the 9 to 5 if you don't want to. You can, but you shouldn't feel obliged to do that, right? And having to create systems that doesn't have to follow someone else's rules, I think is it's always a delight to see someone kind of realize that for themselves. And a lot of it is unlearning and then learning things. And so I would work with folks who throw away the 9 to 5, and then they'll realize they actually quite, they are quite productive within those hours. And so they kind of reconstruct what 9 to 5 looks like for them. And that's totally okay. But I think having that process of articulating and examining that, and then making that decision fully and freely for yourself is the best part of having to create your own career path or create your own business.
I love what she said, because it's not doing things simply because it's default, but to really examine it and make a choice around it. That is kind of what will give you that sense of freedom, right? That sense of freedom that it's not just automatic responses going with what the world has said needs to be done. But at the end of the day, it's again advocating for yourself and how you work best. Am I hearing it kind of the right way that you're
Yeah,
trying to express
absolutely.
it?
Yeah, it absolutely. It's not about being a contrarian either, right? Like it's not just like going against the grain because you are a rebel and you hate society or something. But I think there is something about having to freely choose what you choose. And I think that's why I lean towards decision making, because a lot of the times we do things, but very rarely do we ever ask ourselves, like, why do we actually do this? Is it because we've always done it this way? Is it
Yeah.
because our parents did it this way? Is it because I came from the corporate world and they used to do it this way? And so, and at the end of the day, sometimes that's a good enough answer, but it's being able to get that answer that tends to help us recontextualize why we do the things that we do and why we love the things that we love.
I feel like we're really getting to the heart of what you offer as a service, because I can see, let's say, a board that has been together for many years. They've always done things a certain way, right? But then you can be this person who comes in to help them examine it and make decisions around it. Or, like you said, if it's an individual deciding a career change or becoming an entrepreneur, like, and to pause and to really look at the decisions. Oh, okay, I'm definitely understanding how it all comes together now.
Yeah, and I think it's the interesting part about what I do is that it's seen as a luxury to slow down. And in some ways it is, right? Sometimes we're in seasons of our life where it's a crisis, or yeah, you have a health thing that you need to address and you just need to make the decision. But in turn, the temptation is that every action needs to happen right away, where sometimes that's not always the case. And so being able to carve out a space, and it doesn't need to be a space in a professional setting, it can be a space of self-reflection for you, it could be a space that you carve out with a collaborator or a friend. But being able to slow down and really talk about those big generative things and evaluate, like, okay, I'm about to make this big decision, what do I do? Is I think is something that is missing from our culture, and it's missing from, honestly, from a lot of big organizations, because like, we were taught at a really young age that time is money. And so if you're not doing anything, you're just wasting time, and therefore you're losing money. But I would want to deconstruct that even further to say, like, is money really the most important thing? And is that what your time is worth?
Yeah. So many beautiful things were just said. And I wonder if you have any practical tips or tools to help folks maybe carve out time to really think about their overall sustainability, like personal sustainability, whether it's for their career, for their own health and wellness, or I mean, I'm sure whatever you say will probably be applicable on the organizational level. Just even on my end, I think of a lot of folks, they do end of year reflection or planning for the year, right? Strategic planning often is annual, or birthdays. Like birthdays often are a really great time where people sit down. But I've once heard of someone where they do half birthday reflections too.
Yes.
And of course, there's quarterly. Like there's so many systems that can be done. Do you have any tips you would like to share with those who are listening?
Yes. First off, I would say, I think when you're on the camp of people who's a little bit of an essentialist, right? Like if you tend to be someone who is really practical, you want to get the things done, my advice, I would say, is to think of the non-essential things. What I tend to do with myself, I have this thing where when I'm shopping for gifts and I find something for myself, I would say, like, oh, I don't have time to get something for myself until I finish all of these things, because this is the most important thing. So it's a little bit of like an essentialist mentality. And so what happens is that when you're someone who's like that, all of the things that we deem are non-essential goes down the list. So our hobbies get taken out, like if you like taking long baths and like going for long walks, all of a sudden in a busy day, you cut off the things that actually care for you. And so I would just invite essentialists to pause and see, like, are you cutting off, in fact, essential things in order for you to thrive in those very busy, very, high energy days? And then on the other side of things, if you're someone who likes the unstructured, you like spontaneity and stuff like that, I think the invitation there is like, what kind of structure can actually work with your creativity? And thinking about, like, it's not about boxing you into a 9 to 5, but like, what can actually give you life so that you could be more spontaneous, right? So I think having a starting point of your questions and not discounting the things that maybe you don't deem as important or valuable at the moment, just making time. And it doesn't have to be a whole thing, right? Like it can be a 5-minute check-in with yourself and seeing, like, okay, like, I really want ice cream. But like, oh, it's not healthy or whatever. It's like having that generative kind of conversation with yourself and saying like, well, why don't I think it's healthy, or why don't I think it's important right now? And then most importantly, like starting to build a community of not just like people you spend time with, but people that you could actually be vulnerable about with those things, right? Because once we start talking about how we spend our time and stuff like that, it does take a level of trust and vulnerability for you to have an intentional space that you're being able to express that about yourself and receive that about the other person. So starting to build those, if you don't already have those types of network, is definitely helpful as well.
Okay, so I'm gonna try and summarize. There's a lot. Okay, so I think before you even, well, okay, first of all, the concept of pausing to reflect, it doesn't have to be very long. It can be literally
Not at
5 minutes, right? So it's very doable. In other pieces, like knowing your own tendencies to be able to ask the key questions that would make a big difference for yourself. And once you start to know more, to share it externally and getting some like external feedback is, did I kind of get it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think one thing that you prompt out of that summary is also being okay to have a trial and error. Doesn't have to be all the time, but I think one of the things that is fed off with productivity is having a schedule and keeping with it. But there is a lot of abilities and neurodivergent folks that need the variety in their life. And so if something works for you, keep it until it doesn't anymore, and then find another system.
Yeah.
And like again, kind of not being afraid to go through a trial and error process and going back and re-articulating. I have this joke with myself of this year my New Year's resolution is to not have any more character development. Like I don't want to learn anything about myself, but the truth is, no matter how stable it feels now, there's always something in life that happens. And so going back into reflection and trial and error and relearning, unlearning things, that's all sort of a part of it. And finding the joy and delight in that, I think, tends to make that process easier.
Yeah. And I'm so curious, like for you, it sounds like you are someone who practice what you preach and you have these check-ins and iterations. So what is on your list now that you do, like activities that you engage in to help recharge, to fill your cup? Like, what do you do?
I love crafts and sewing. I love going for walks and things like that. And just like what I said, that tends to be the thing that gets cut out when I'm really busy. This year, I've really become more aware of how much I cut or include my hobbies in my day-to-day rhythm. And I try not to put it off. If I have a big project, I'll say like, okay, I don't need to be completely distracted and not finish it in the deadline. But if I want to give myself 10 minutes to go for a walk or 10 minutes to finish a line of crochet work, I'm going to give myself that 10 minutes because it gives me so much joy. And so I think being able to lean into not just hobbies, but again, like the non-essential things had been really transformative for me this year. And, yeah, being able to like re-listen, because like I said, this joke, but really, it's sort of true, like because I've done a lot of self-reflection work, sometimes I get into seasons where I get tired of having to reflect. But what this year taught me is really, in the right seasons of your life, especially if you have the support of people that love you and care for you and want to know all the things about you, it actually makes reflection and self-care a lot easier than it is on your own.
Yeah. I imagine like when you give yourself those moments of joy, you'll go back to your work liking your work more too, right?
Yeah, and I think that those pauses makes me more excited in going back to whatever it is that I'm doing. It also gives me a chance to make my identity fuller than just what I do for work, which is really important, especially when you are in seasons of transition. Because I know that there's going to come a time where maybe I'm not doing the work that I love to do right now and I have to look for another thing. And, as much as I could mourn those things or whatever, I think it becomes a lot easier to be able to go through the transitions when it's needed, when I'm like, my personhood is not just all about that.
Yes, 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 yes. Yeah. Yeah, I support a lot of folks through life and career transitions. And when it is career focused, and often that is the entry point for folks to come reach out to me, but I always bring it back out to a more holistic perspective of like, how are you doing? Like, what else are you engaged in that's, like you said, bringing you joy, satisfaction, fulfillment, meaning, purpose, right? And sometimes there's seasons, and you've used that word a lot, like sometimes there's seasons more focused on your health or family or other obligations or those hobbies, even to reconnect with the joy of having hobbies. And like life is so dynamic and to like let it be not just a regimented routine 9 to 5, 5 days a week for however many decades of work you're gonna do. But I think we're past that now, right? Like we don't have to live that way. And yeah, what are your thoughts? Any
Yeah.
final words that you want to share?
Yeah, I just think, it's such a pleasure to do the things that I do, or even be able to talk about this, because I'm starting to find that you're right, there's a lot more people, I think now, even compared to maybe 5 years ago, that has that shared sentiment of like, it's not just about work. And I would say, from listening to your podcast, a lot of your listeners and a lot of your guests have sort of shared that sentiment that, even when we really love our work, there's so much more like fullness that is alongside that, and that's kind of what makes it beautiful. So yeah, it's just such a pleasure to be introduced to a larger pool of community that shares that sentiment, and I'm certainly like learning a lot more and growing more in that area.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for listening to some of our other other episodes. And I actually think so many of your themes brought up today will be reflected in other season 2 guests as well. So definitely I feel like it's going to be great to listen to it as a whole. I think there's such rich conversations now, and a lot more openness to have these conversations. So I'm really excited, and I'm so grateful that you've joined me today to have this conversation. And where can folks find you if they want to learn more, whether it's your work or even your hobbies? I know you have a place for that.
Yes, yeah. So you could find me on LinkedIn. I'm Vea Coronado. My website is crownandcalling.com, but my Instagram social is just my personal account. It's where I post sort of the things that I sew and alter and knit and things like that. So if you want to just get social and talk about, pastimes or even like building community, especially within the Vancouver Lower Mainland. I also love connecting on Instagram where I am the crown style.
I highly recommend they follow. There is so much to see. Vea is an avid thrifter, also very talented person who's able to create lots of fun styles from the things she finds, community builder. I also actually have even been to some of your clothing swaps. Like there's just so much that you do. So follow Vea. Really, really cool stuff. Yeah, so once again, just want to say thank you, Vea. I wish you all the best. I know you and I will cross paths again very soon in the community and hopefully with some of the listeners joining us very soon.
Thank you so much for having me, Crystal. And yeah, I am so thankful to have you in my network, but also to have a podcast like this where I get to hear about other folks that are in sort of their own career and business journeys. That's just been really inspiring for me as well. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to the After Work Hangout. If you enjoy honest conversations about career decisions and life choices, remember to subscribe to the After Work Hangout so you'll know when our next episode drops. And don't forget to leave a 5-star rating while you're at it. You can find a summary of this episode along with more information about our guests and resources that were mentioned at relocal.ca. That's RELOCAL.ca. If you take a look around the website, you'll also find blog posts, downloads, and community offerings to support your career development. I'm your host, Crystal Lee, and I'm always interested in hearing what topics you'd like to learn about. You can connect with me on Instagram at relocal.ca, or you can email me at crystal@relocal.ca. Finally, I want to say a big thank you to all the guests and supporters who make this podcast possible. This includes my podcast manager, Lindsay Curtis, and graphic designer, Alex Dewar, who created the podcast art. Thanks again for listening and sticking around. I hope you're more inspired and ready to make the moves that are right for you. See you at the next Hangout.